welcome to SHOWstudio. It's Paris Fashion Week and we're going to be talking about the Louis Vuitton show, and it's my favourite panel of the season because it's our student panel where we get wonderful, excited young people from across different colleges to come in and talk about their views, specifically on one show but also more broadly on fashion in general and the state of the industry and their hopes and dreams. And I should say as a disclaimer, we didn't coordinate our outfits, because we look like a girl band. On Happy International Women's Day, as he was observed. That was a bit of a mollycoddled introduction, but anyway, to kick things off, I'll let my fabulous set of students just tell us all a bit about themselves and what they're doing, starting here.
My name's Simsola Ladega. I study fashion design at Westminster University, and I'm also a fashion blogger at styleandscripture.com.
I'm Rhea Dillon. I study fashion communication and promotion at Central St Martin's.
I'm Alice Firman. I'm in my first years of Masters in Fashion Womenswear at the Royal College of Art.
I'm Sophie Brunker. I study fashion management and marketing at the University of Creative Arts in Epsom, and I also intern at SHOWstudio.
My name is Anointed Charis. I'm in my last year of fashion promotion and imaging at FPR at UCA in Epsom, and I'm a freelance assistant for Katie Grand.
So, what have you guys made of the shows this season? Have you been following them closely? What stood out? Do you think that Fashion Week is something that you still, as people studying sort of fashion, is it something that you still find interesting and relevant? What's everyone's take? Someone has to be brave and start.
I think.
Oh, sorry.
Everyone's going to be brave.
I think this season's been really clear in that the cities are so different, and that, like, if you look at London, the design is obviously quite new and it's quite creative, but then it's complete contrast to Paris, where it seems like the more big designers are producing a lot more commercial collections that they're trying to make wearable, but then it's contrasting because what they're trying to do as brands, they're trying to appeal to a mass audience, but then their collections are kind of really expensive and only a certain audience can buy them, so it's quite confusing when you look on their Instagram and they're trying to get everyone involved and hashtag and behind the scenes, and then you see the show and it's like, oh, that was really good, but I can never wear it because I can't afford it.
Do you think there's a lot of kind of mixed messages, mixed goals? Does everyone else agree with that?
Yeah. I think definitely, like, in terms of the higher brands, like collaborating with like Supreme and Louis Vuitton and all that kind of stuff, it reaches out to a wider audience. Like you said, obviously fashion is more accessible to everyone now, but then it's almost like you really, really, really want to buy it, but you know you can't afford it, so why are you dishing it to us if you can't get it?
Yeah.
But it's really amazing to look at and like admire.
But I think that's always been fashion. It's this high level of brands and high expenses, etc. But like, you really, really want it, and they're keeping that aspiration alive, whereas with other collections you'd see it and it would be this opulence that you just never wear on the high street, whereas with Supreme and obviously Kim Jones, it's like that's more of the excitement back in. It's like, yeah, that's really cool, yeah, that's what I really want. And Supreme do exactly the same thing, where it's just the drops, and that, I think that was a great collection for that.
I think, yeah, like it definitely cultivates that like social media audience in terms of like what you said, everyone just kind of, there's like a following on wanting to see more, and like, yeah, definitely.
Everyone can relate to it because it's less high fashion and less couture, I would say. Yeah.
Do you think a lot of brands are running like that at the moment? It's interesting you talk about, so you kind of, a few of you mentioned social media, and it was interesting if you look at a brand sort of, someone like Gucci, for example, how they operate, which is so much about inviting people into the world, even if you maybe can't buy the product. Do you guys find that interesting as a concept, or cynical? Like, how do you find that?
I find that a really interesting concept because you get a lot more people involved and through social medias. And for example, I don't know if you guys have been, but the Shalion show invited 300 students to it, and that was a really exciting thing, that it was open to a lot more people. And yes, I cannot afford the Shalion dress or jacket, but I was able to go and be part of it and see it, and also inviting students from fashion schools was a really exciting move.
So it's almost this idea of brands operating slightly like publishers as well, where they're sort of, or you know, event managers, where they're bringing people in, letting people be involved in sort of their worlds and what they're doing. But, sorry, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, I think that it's really good that a lot of brands are doing it at the moment, but I think because so many brands are doing it now, you can tell which ones are authentic and which ones have been doing it for a long time, and which ones are kind of jumping on the bandwagon now because they realise that's what everyone else is doing, so that's what they feel like they have to get involved with and do. And then I think that's where the confusion kind of lies, because it's not a bit too late, because you can't not do it now. You have to be doing it, but it's not as authentic, so people might not take it so seriously.
You were nodding to a lot of that, do you agree?
I think like now a lot of brands, especially like during Fashion Week, they make it for Instagram. It's not really like I've watched like 4 shows because I've seen most of the stuff on Instagram, and it's like the image now is more important than like what you're actually making. So people will like share it, and like people really only care about the shows like that have the best front row or have the best like models in it. Which I don't know, like I just think it's more for like to make an image now rather than to make something because that's what you were like feeling like making, if that makes sense.
Which is a very different way of designing clothes. Like, when I interview designers, a lot of them talk about the sort of the first wave that came along when there was that sort of e-commerce exploded, and they started to have to change their designs to suit e-commerce. So that kind of, that ran in tandem slightly with the digital print explosion, or even just on a really pedantic level, designers talk about having to, if you've got a motif on the back, also put a little motif on the front of like a bomber or a sweater or whatever, so people know to click to look at more pictures, all of that. And then I think there's been the second layer where shows have become so consumed digitally, and that's added to a sort of a change in design. And do you guys worry that will affect the integrity of fashion design? Is that something that you think is in any way dumbing down fashion?
Well, somehow it's dumbing down because it makes it accessible. Not dumbing down because it makes it accessible to everyone, but because a lot of people are good at taking very good Instagram photos. So, but as you said, you can really see when something is true, or when something is just made for Instagram accounts.
I think it's really strange as well because when I started working at London Fashion Week, before I started uni, they were really, really strict about you can't take pictures backstage, and if you take pictures backstage, you must tag everyone, and it must be after the show's live. But now, when I do it, they really don't care. They encourage you to take pictures, and they or you'll get given the company iPad and have to do like an Instagram story or stuff like that. So it's in like 2 years or 3 years, it's changed so much.
Yeah. They love like live streaming, like backstage of them getting ready and like showing all the models getting ready and stuff. That's like part of the show now.
Yeah, that whole, even the girls arriving, the girls sleeping outside, all of that. And what do you guys think about the whole see now, buy now thing, which it kind of is in tandem to that, which is this idea of if you're using your show to create instant imagery, you kind of need to be able to actually back it up by selling the clothes. What do you guys think of see now, buy now? Maybe seeing now and buying now.
Difficult one because obviously you see the collections and you'd be like, oh, I want that now, and then it takes 6 months and you're already bored of it because fashion is so fast and changes so fast, and what we like changes so fast because we're fed all this information. But then at the same time, having it immediately, it kind of strips back the luxury of fashion and what we, like even with the shows, like you're so excited for the show and then it happens in 2 seconds and it's like gone. I don't know, you kind of want to live through that moment and the beauty of fashion a bit more. So maybe it shouldn't be as long as 6 months, but maybe it shouldn't be as quick as the next day you can e-shop it.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree because I work at Love, and when we get stuff in like straight off the runway, it's like, it's weird. It's almost like you've just gone in a shop and like bought it, like a high street shop. Yeah. Whereas like when you wait, not 6 months, I think 6 months is too long, but if you wait like a month, you like almost forget about how amazing it is, and then when you see it again, you're like, oh, it's like a present.
Yeah, I think that is that idea. It's like a present. It's that idea. But there's also, if you think about the whole original concept of sort of high fashion, you think about things like waiting lists and, almost this idea of it being hard to get things. And I think now there is this idea that, brands should make it as easy as possible for people to get things. And it's interesting, if you mentioned like Vuitton Supreme, which I thought was clever in a way because as much as that was a very sort of democratic, newsworthy collaboration that got a lot of attention on social media, all around Supreme is this idea of exclusivity, and in a way it feels more sort of pulled back and pared back than high fashion, where it's kind of click to buy, look at this, whereas Supreme it's like wait lists, queue outside the store. I wondered if that seems more luxurious now to how high fashion's operating.
I think waiting for something is more high fashion, and high fashion is always been opposed to fast fashion, which is H&M and something you buy and throw away. So if you can get something straight away in 1 minute, it takes away that waiting that we were talking about, that makes a product expensive and make you want it and like dream about it kind of thing. And I think that is part of buying into a luxury brand, that it's not accessible straight away, that it's not accessible to everyone, and you'll feel special wearing it because you waited a month for it to go on Net-a-Porter and buy it.
I think you're right. Like that's why the Supreme and Louis Vuitton collab was so successful. Is that it is that waiting for that drop. Like it's so exciting when you see all those kids to really like grown men in that queue. It's like it's insane. People love it. They love the like the opulence.
It's like the theatre of that shopping experience.
And like fashion and theatre go so well together because of that. You know,
And especially with a brand like Supreme, it's so much about identity. Like if you buy Supreme, you're kind of part of the gang. Like people that buy into that, they're really, it's a group and it's a collective. So it's just an extension of that. Like the Louis Vuitton Supreme collection is just, you're in another cool gang. It's like another, it kind of,
It's like a cooler version of the cool gang. Like a little splinter group within the cool gang.
But the collective is very, like, that's a good point that you're making. Like, I think we're in the age of collectives, and I think brands who latch onto that and recognize that, that's why we've got these, like, collections that have the story and that make sense together. It's like, okay, we want to then make the Louis Vuitton collective, we want to then make the Gucci gang, like, you know, like the Balmain army, like all those things that are happening right now. And that's how they get through to these subcultures who don't want to necessarily wear that, like the Supreme groups who don't maybe want to wear whatever or whatever. It's like, that's how you infiltrate it, by creating this group and creating this world that you want to be part of, because it is that now.
It's like you mentioned subcultures, it's because they're not as obvious as they used to be. Like in the 90s and stuff, it was really obvious. Subcultures had a certain look, but then thinking about it, there is still some today. It's just not as obvious, but it's more so the brands you buy than the whole aesthetic. You don't have to have the certain makeup. It's like, oh, you're wearing a Palace top, like you're wearing a Supreme top. Is that? It's a different sort of.
And I think it's interesting you talk about these gangs, because I also think they're a way of brands more, you know, adding a veneer of authenticity to a social media strategy as well. It's much easier to disseminate your message if, you know, it's done in the guise of, you know, guise makes it sound cynical or like it's untrue in some way, but, you know, having like a gang or an army around you is basically also a set of spokespeople who can go out and talk for the brand or publicise the brand.
And also more people will relate. And I think having some realness to your brand is what people buy into, because you can see yourself being one of the people in the gang, or following one of the people in the gang. And
you feel akin to them, so then you, What are the brands that you guys, we've mentioned a few brands, but what are the brands that you think are cool? Like if you could buy anything, what would you buy?
If I had to look at like this season and stuff that I would really love to wear, I really loved Miu Miu. Like I'm so into colourful fur right now that I just thought that show was just really fun, and just I just wanted to wear the stuff on the catwalk and just go out and just feel really warm and really cozy. But
I love how specific that is. You're like, I'm really into colourful fur right now.
I have these moments where I'm like in and out, like, oh, it's
so adorable.
It's so great. It was just so great.
And the raincoat, the like clear raincoat with the like collar.
I think there's a really clever thing with Miu Miu as well. Obviously, it's the thing with Miuccia Prada, but like, it's very good at doing something that feels kind of immediately slightly gimmicky or silly, but then you always presume a level of intellectual weight behind it because it's kind of part of the Prada family. What else do you guys think is sort of interesting? What other brands are you that you think are sort of getting it right? Or even not brands, like people within fashion. And what are you sort of super excited by?
I really loved how Celine did the set design with the moving seats, and people saw that. And just because obviously I didn't go to the show, but apparently it was like kind of like a street where just models were walking around, and like you kind of saw the same model like 4 or 5 times, and that kind of, I guess, being able to just distort the audience, where usually they're so like precious and on the side and like, you know, like front row you can't touch them, but like Phoebe having the confidence to be like, actually I'm going to twist you around, I'm going to show you how like crazy fashion is and how whirlwind that we're all in. I think it was just really, really great. I think set design is really important for fashion shows, because that's what keeps it exciting, that's what keeps it alive, that's what keeps us wanting to see the shows rather than just see it on Instagram.
Seeing the Louis Vuitton live show yesterday, the Louvre looked incredible, and the models were walking something like half a mile
They were
in the catwalk with such an interesting.
With such a show of sort of might by Louis Vuitton and strength and power, isn't it? You know, to show at the Louvre, and also that sort of sense of Frenchness, you know, being a French brand, you know, a French luxury house in the Louvre, which is such a French institution, and it's always like this meeting of these great, huge French things. It's really like a show of power. And it is quite, sometimes it can be, sometimes it can get a little much when brands do something of that ilk, but you know, I think there is something really special about fashion showing its own sort of strength and flexing its own muscle. Like when Gucci did the show at Westminster Abbey, for example, it was super beautiful and amazing, and I think there is something quite sort of wonderful about these. And also I think this idea of art and fashion coming together, which is something actually maybe pre-Guesquière at Vuitton, but if you think of Louis Vuitton's history as a house in terms of ready-to-wear, you do think of the amazing collaborations with different artists, so it doesn't feel like it's completely removed from its history. What do you guys think of Louis Vuitton at the moment in terms of what Nicolas Guesquière is doing there?
I think it's really smart. Like the fact that like the most followed person on Instagram, Selena Gomez, is the face of like Louis Vuitton is really smart.
Kind of weird though as well.
So weird. It makes no sense. Like when I saw her in a campaign, I was like, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
But like, it's just really smart, and like they have the best actresses like fronting their campaigns. Like it's like appeals to mass market, and then when you see some of the clothes, you don't think like people that don't really care about fashion would like care about it. But yeah, no, I think it's just really clever, and so much of it translate into high street. I've literally seen Topshop knock off half their collection. So yeah, it's just really clever.
Do you think that Nicolas Guesquière's work there is as strong as it was? That you guys fans of his work with Balenciaga? Do you think it's because there's grumblings about, you know, how he's not quite hit his stride and what have you?
I think Balenciaga's work by Guesquière was much stronger because it was bolder, whilst I mean Marc Jacobs for Louis Vuitton was really strong, especially the last few shows he did. And then Guesquière came in and started putting his Balenciaga like shapes and geometrical love and sci-fi into Louis Vuitton that had nothing of that really. Well, nothing, but he didn't do it in such a bold way. So I think it's still not up to its potential, I would say.
Well, Balenciaga was so conceptual, wasn't it? And I think with Vuitton there's a different brief in a way. So I think it is hard.
Different customer.
Yeah, it's a different customer. What does everyone? Are you a fan of Nicolas Guesquière Balenciaga?
I think I prefer his work personally to Marc's work.
Okay.
Just because I feel like there's almost more of a signature and kind of a connection between his collections so far. Whereas when you look at Marc's work, like for the last decade or so, it's almost like one collection is like really like mature, and the next one is quite young and preppy, and the next one, which I think is really exciting because it's important for a designer to change. But I feel like when it comes to Guesquière, he has such a appreciation for like ultra modern fabrics and like structure and construction, and you kind of appreciate that throughout all of his work.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about that sort of modernity of having that continuation between your shows, which is obviously how a lot of brands are operating now, where you don't have that seasonal thing that Marc Jacobs does so well of like going from, you know, completely like one decade through to one decade, like, you know, miming different references. So in that way it does feel more sort of more modern. Are you a fan? Do you like it?
I really like Marc Jacobs' storytelling. Like I think that's what made the shows so exciting to watch. Like every season, like the one with the doors, that was so fun to watch.
Or the
like,
escalator one.
yeah, it's so exciting. And then obviously like the last show that he did with the girl like covered in like the Stephen Sprouse, like
a headpiece.
yeah, exactly. Like I was excited by the story that Marc was going to tell, and I don't feel like Nicolas Guesquière has necessarily like a key story for each collection. I think like it kind of ebbs and weaves at every so often. Like it's really strong, and then it, like with this collection, I feel like there was some mismatch, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I think that's why I do think that Nicolas Guesquière is still trying to get into his stride of saying this is me at Louis Vuitton. Like him at Balenciaga was so him, as unlike towards the end where he obviously wasn't feeling comfortable. But yeah, I think I'm still waiting for him to be solid.
Yeah, and I guess that sense of narrative is something that you know, just Marc Jacobs established so firmly as part of that house, you're always going to miss that sort of slightly.
Yeah.
And what do you make of also, because what's quite interesting in the current climate when we're seeing so many people doing their shows, uniting their men's and women's offerings. Obviously Vuitton are very distinct because they have a different designer for men's and women's. You know, Kim Jones has a very specific aesthetic and focus in how he does the men's. Guessier obviously very different. Do you guys think that's still important, that these houses have different ways of operating, or do you prefer to see men's and women's together? How do you approach it all?
I think with Louis Vuitton, it slightly confused me because obviously initially they were a luggage brand. So then I think, obviously they've been doing it for a long time, but ready-to-wear is then hard to move on from a luggage brand. Most brands do ready-to-wear and then luggage or accessories. But I think because they have such distinct sections, it kind of makes it a bit confusing when they have different designers for different things because they're very separate. So the people that be buying the menswear are probably like their wives or partners might not buy the women's wear. It's not the same type of person that buying all the different things that they sell.
Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, it's kind of like a similar, like in terms of the person that they're aiming it for. Obviously Kim Jones and Guessier have got, like you said, different aesthetics. So it's like a particular man will go for, like it's almost like a younger kind of cleaner man, and then for Guessier it's almost more like a mature like lady. So but I personally like when they have men and women on the catwalk because I like wearing men and women's clothes, and I think it's kind of more known in our generation now. So it's nice to be able to see something that is tied to the rest of the collection, but it might be more masculine.
I think I do like that they do have separate shows, but I feel like it's important that the menswear shows are as appreciated as the women's wear shows. Like, I think it's nice that they have their own fashion week. Obviously, like we just, well, not just, but kind of just got men's fashion week here. So it's nice that they have a platform where they can be elaborate, they can, you know, do their own thing.
And you think if men's and women's are brought together, maybe the menswear will become too much of an accessory to the women's wear?
Yeah, like they're kind of
There's not as many
oddly
looks
dispersed in the show. They're not, it's not like boy, girl, like this is an equal thing. It's like, oh, they're just kind of at the middle or at the end. They're never like opening the show. It's always a women's wear show with menswear in it.
I think it's fine to have two different catwalks. I'm really into androgyny, and so it's nice to have them together as well, but I totally get what you're saying. But I think in terms of the Louis Vuitton, they really looked like two separate collections, as you said, and I think you should almost at least start from the same story. In terms, I felt in the men's, there was one story going through plus the Supreme, whilst in the women's there were so many narratives, and a few of them, the like pinstripe trousers, sports fur was really great, and then I thought I got lost in this evening dresses.
Well, Kim Jones operates, well, obviously he, you know, worked alongside Marc Jacobs for so long, but he operates a bit more like Marc Jacobs in terms of conceptualising a collection. You know, it's a story. Often it's, you know, like the reference for this show is kind of looking at New York, basically across 3 decades. It was kind of 70s, 80s, 90s, looking at the scene, the different artists who were working at that time. But he does tend to take these, you know, it could be an India collection or what have you. He takes these very specific references, which is quite a Marc way of doing it. Where, as you say with Guessier, you don't get the sense that he was like musing on Basquiat or something. You know, it's much more fluid in that sense. But then I guess it's that tricky thing of like, we've talked a little bit about the pace of fashion, and it's like if you bring your men and your women's under one umbrella, it's also putting even more pressure onto those designers. And I mean, is that something that you guys find overwhelming about fashion, that sense of the quantity of work and the speed of it? Is that something that sort of, you're like, is that something that freaks you out going into it?
Definitely. As like studying fashion design and knowing that this is the industry I want to go into, it's kind of the idea of having to produce 4 collections a year when we have a project for one garment, it's already like stressful. So just the thought of them having to think of so many different ideas, and for each collection it has to be different, but at the same time it has to be similar. But then it's just so much that goes into it. It is kind of petrifying, not gonna lie.
I don't study design, I study communication, but I kind of find it really exciting that they have loads to do, I guess because I'm not designing. But I think in uni you have so many ideas, and when we have projects like once a week or in for the next week, it's like, okay, I have so many ideas, what can I do that's the best out of that batch that can impress or excite me the most for that week? And so I think as a designer or as a creative, you're kind of someone who's got so much going on in your head all the time. So to have a collection where you can be like, okay, I'm going to pluck this one from the crowd, and then next season I'm going to do this one. It allows you to explore and work out what's going on.
I mean, studying design, it is really hard work, and I think, as you might know, we don't have much of a life, and social life, and there's a lot of being in uni and working on your collection, but if that's what you want to do, it just becomes incredibly exciting. Last year I did my collection, didn't have a life for so many months, was ill for so many months, but it didn't quite matter because I was so excited about it. And it's the same now, and obviously the pace of fashion is something you need to keep up with, and it's so fast, might be too fast maybe, having to come out with 4 collections a year if you're having resort and like so many collections, but if that's what you want, it becomes exciting as anything else. I think.
You mentioned this idea that maybe it's too fast. Do you guys think that there is a sort of unsustainable aspect of fashion at the moment? Too many shows, too many magazines, and what have you?
Yeah, there's too much of everything, I think. I think like I like it when designers decide that they're just not going to do it. They're just not going to show
like
this
kind of
time. I like respect that, because I'm tired. I'll show you a couple images and you can see it next time. Like, I don't think we should have to force out stuff just because like you have to. Like, I think Chanel do like 8 shows a year.
They have like 100 pieces in one show.
I think there's not enough space in between pre-collection, resort, collection, cruise for actually like customers to even understand
all those
the changes between pre-collection. I think if they only had main collections, it would be quite.
I wonder if it's all going to like merge into one, and then brands will just show when they have something like really special to say, because there's so many even like we even talk about the fact that, you know, there's mainline and then there's like pre or what have you, but within those collections, the way they actually make it to store, you know, most of the bigger brands, perhaps, you know, definitely not the younger designers, will do that through a series of drops anyway. So then it almost gets broken up into these like micro collections anyway to drop at different times. So you think if the product's being drip fed, just this goes back to what we're talking about with the 2 calendars just being sort of slightly off. But I do wonder if people will show if they really have something to say, because you do feel like there is a lot of like, you know, you feel bad to sound jaded because obviously it's like such a privilege to be able to go to the shows and it's amazing, but then you do sit there sometimes and you're like, what a waste of everyone's time. And so much money as well, and it's so wasteful. You sit and you watch these shows that just don't need to be shows, you know, they could be, you know, a presentation at best and maybe even just a look, but you know, it's just I find that interesting sort of for your generation sort of going into fashion, whether there is that sort of, I don't know, does it make you feel less of a desire to start your own things, whether it's, you know, I know a couple of you have started projects, and I wonder if that comes from, you know, if you obviously feel that there is still space to do something new, or do you feel more desire to go work for other people? How does it make you feel, that sort of exhaustive nature of fashion?
I originally came in wanting to work for like a big place, and now I'm actually starting my own. I'm starting my own like online zine for teenage girls, because I find as well, like especially in my project, I like picking things out, like my favorite things, and then merging that together. Like that's what I like to do. I don't really just like love everything from a collection. I might like 3 looks and then 3 looks from another show, and that's how, especially like teenagers today, even though I'm 21, I feel like a grandma when I talk to them. That's how they operate. They see what Gigi posts, they see that one look, and then they see what like Kendall posts from another show, and they're like, oh yeah, I really like Fashion Week, because they saw like the little highlights of it, which I think is quite like cool, because you see how it like all merges together as like a thing. Because now on Instagram, fashion is just like this big massive like whole of like everything, and people can't really, unless you really care about fashion, you can't differentiate between it. It's just one
and
massive
whole collections
thing.
get wrapped up into one image. You know, like the Hoda Ackerman show is basically represented by Nicki Minaj, which makes me feel bad for him as a designer, because I'm like, but like no one's going to remember that collection. Everyone's going to remember what Nicki Minaj was, and it's the same when you think of like, you know, that Saint Laurent red heart-shaped coat that just defined that collection. And I think it is interesting that sort of. But I think that's another sort of aspect of the pace, isn't it? That, you know, you almost can't, there's too much noise, you can't remember everything, so it just becomes these specific.
But I don't know if the pace now, like if the collections now are going to be remembered as some of the ones in the 90s, like people always remember like Margiela and McQueen, but I don't, like, will people remember the collections now? Because if they're showing like 4 or 6 a year, I can't necessarily look at something and pinpoint it from now. Like I could if it was an older collection, but I don't think people read into it as much as what people used to necessarily.
That's a really smart point. I think people probably remember it as moments.
Yeah.
So I think people remember like Alessandro Michele taking over at Gucci and his first few collections. Whereas you're right, like when people talk about McQueen, they'll talk about like Dante or you know Voss, and they'll talk about the
feel
specifics.
like in the 90s with Margiela and Jean Paul Gaultier, every show was kind of a couture show. So it was such a theatrical moment, not necessarily in terms of like choreography, but in terms of pieces and statement pieces. Whereas now, yes, couture shows, I've got a lot of statement pieces, but Pret-a-Porter has got a lot less. So of those 25 jackets on 100 looks, you remember the one you liked and you wanted to buy. So I think I agree that people will remember moments. I think Alessandro Michele's changing, or the Gucci style and the men of Gucci will be definitely a moment to remember.
I think people looking to fashion, they've become more streetwear orientated. Like we want to be comfortable in our clothes now, as opposed to back then when it was like when you're going out, you want to dress up and you've got to show out and etc. But like now when I'm going out, like it's cool to just wear Supreme or wear that brand or logo. So like with the couture shows, I don't watch them anymore because I know like I'm definitely never going to wear anything in those collections, like or let alone try and afford it. Like it's so far from what everyone kind of is comfortable with wearing. So
I think it's like a sense of like relating to the collection and feeling like you're included and that you actually have like a part to play in terms of watching it and receiving it and then passing it on.
My tummy's rumbling really loud. Can you hear it? It's so loud. Can you hear it on the microphone? Oh my god. Can you? I was like trying to listen to what you were saying and I was like, this is mortifying. It's so loud. I need to eat. Should we have a look at the show so some other sound can drown out the sound? Can you hear it now? Yeah, I'm just going to stop this now. Can we have the music? It's the worst day of my life. See, some of you kind of mentioned your thoughts on, some of you kind of mentioned your thoughts on the show just as we were sort of opening up the discussion, this idea that, you talked about this idea of the Louis Vuitton men's show as being a very focused statement, whereas this was slightly more sort of different looks, a little bit more disparate. Was that everyone's kind of reading? Were people, I'm aware the show was yesterday, so were people impressed by what they saw, or did they? You're doing a really good face.
I liked some of the looks. Some of the looks, I was like,
some
oh
of them
my
were
gosh,
strong, like the styling was like, yes, I wear that now. But a lot of them I was like, no.
There's a lot of different women in that show as well. Like literally,
that was what was exciting.
Yeah, it was.
I loved casting.
It was almost like
so important to me.
Obviously, Louis Vuitton is about travel. So whenever I look at these shows like this, I'm kind of thinking, where is this woman going? Where is that woman going? And it kind of makes you create your own story about their motive for the day. I think, it was interesting.
I think it's also this idea, isn't it? It's more of like a proposition for a wardrobe rather than a creative statement. I think that's kind of how he's running his tenure at Vuitton, is this idea of sort of key pieces, different occasions.
He's trying to make it quite wearable, I think. It's not, you don't look and go, that's completely unwearable, but it's amazing. Like, it shocks me.
Which is really different to Balenciaga.
Yeah.
Balenciaga got so funny. Like, actually, even if you look at some of those, because they were so widely ripped off by, other fashion designers through to the high street, those collections look so normal now, some of them. But I remember, obviously I didn't go to the shows at that time, but I remember sitting in, obviously, because I'm so young, but like, that sounded ridiculous, but I didn't go to the shows at that time. But I remember looking at them, and that's such an example of what we were talking about before, is something that would only make sense. Sometimes not even 6 months later, it would take such a long time, whereas I guess this is just being made in a different climate where everything has to be so much more instantly, and it just needs to resonate instantly, I guess.
Yeah. I think the wardrobe point that you made was really to the point, because it isn't just like, say with Kim Jones, like this is this whole thing, this is this this is the Supreme guy and Louis Vuitton together, but this is like, it's different pieces that you'd wear, maybe even throughout different times of the year. I don't think it was necessarily just autumn, winter, or just spring, summer. I feel like there were different things that, yes, this is my wardrobe for the year.
I think that was really resonant this season though. Like, it almost felt quite seasonless because you were seeing summer and autumn, winter in New York especially.
Yeah, and now just being at the show, I mean, you know what season it is, but it just doesn't. It doesn't relate to that at all. It feels like, and I think it just can't anymore. The way that people sell their clothes, like internationally and what have you.
I think what was quite exciting was the use so many different textures. And I think it was the first collection you used fur.
Yeah, what do you guys think? Because it's a fur, it's like heavy on the exploration into fur. Yeah. Where do you guys stand on fur? It's such a it's as a debate. It feels like it's so fallen from, like, people just don't talk about it anymore.
At uni, at the Royal College, we've had quite a few debates lately, and we had Copenhagen Fur and Basel, two people coming in that work on sustainable fur. So on this idea of having animals not shot and animals that you fully eat, and then use the fur as you would use leather skins. And I've never worked with fur, but I quite like that concept and this idea of, fur is a really, really durable material, so it's something that will stay with you.
Well, there's this weird thing that you often see at London Fashion Week, where those big fur companies that you refer, some of them are, ethical fur companies, often sponsor or pay for younger designers' collections or give them money. So that's why you often see fur so much which is a very good way of them looking like young designers, like cool with fur. But they just need money.
I think that with fur, because in the debate, there were some people really against fur. So it was a panel with 6 people, some really for fur and some really against. And the people against, the people for fur, were talking about how, fake fur is made of polyester, so it's actually a lot less environmental. But then people that were against it were saying that the more you create a fur trend, the more the Eastern world will kind of copy it and produce all this fast fashion fake fur. And so that obviously is kind of like a cause effect. So that's why it's a really difficult thing, isn't it? Subject.
I guess it works for a brand like Louis Vuitton in a way where you think it's already a brand where people are willing to spend so much money on it. It's whenever you get into a conversation like that, it's slightly wrapped up in this idea of, like, quality and value and worth. And I think fur is something that just has this sense of value around it in the same way like leather does. And I found some of the other textures that he did really interesting. I was really obsessed with the denim, like it's not denim, it's wool kind of treat, and I thought that was really interesting because it goes back to sort of what I think you talked about his way with fabrics when he was at Balenciaga, and I think it's nice to see that played with here. What does everyone else like about it? Did everyone else like the fur, dislike the fur?
I love the trousers.
That trousers.
And especially that look.
He does a good trouser.
Yeah, he does. And the boots are always great. I think, again, that's the travel aspect. Like, you're not just walking down the high street, like you're going around, you're getting from A to B and you're doing this and that. Like, they always look great.
There was a Mac a couple of minutes ago that I thought someone was to buy that, they'd just have it for their whole entire life and it'd be a coat that you'd wear forever.
Would you guys buy Louis Vuitton?
Yeah.
If I had money,
I'd buy boots,
And the trousers with the pinstripe.
And it's tailored jackets.
You're like, I'd buy them.
I think, honestly, as a taste, the dresses, the slip dress, knee length was less strong. The first looks with the leather and the jackets and the boots was very directional.
So you prefer like the day wear separates rather than his proposition for evening wear? Yeah, that's interesting. It is amazing to watch it just in terms of like that setting and that sense of, because I read that also like they were invited by the Louvre to do the show there, which is really interesting if that happened, because it also shows, I guess, the public, like the currency of fashion within France. I think it's kind of, there is this, I've been thinking about this a lot just in terms of sort of, in Britain, obviously fashion is such a huge industry, but I think you still have this sense that it's seen as something frivolous or perhaps light, and you're very aware when it's Fashion Week in London, like that it's not something that involves the whole city, even if people talk about it like it does. You know, it brings a lot of money, but you see that in the way that people stand outside the shows and just kind of stare at these eccentrically dressed people coming in. Whereas when you're in France, I don't know, there's something about it where it just feels like Fashion Week is more in the air, it's more in like the city's cultural code. So I think it's really interesting to see it at somewhere like the Louvre.
What do people think of the soundtracks? Obviously, it's Frank
yeah,
Ocean's
Frank
Pyramids.
Ocean's
I'm so pleased.
I also think it's quite funny because it's
Is it a
pyramid.
pyramid? Yeah, that's what
I was thinking. Like,
I actually watched the show and I was like chuckling because I was like, this is so ironic.
No.
I don't know whether they were like, oh, we can't do that, it's a pyramid, that's silly. But no, I think it was. But also,
smart.
Franco is so, you know, so in fashion right now. So it's kind of like.
I think it's aiming for that younger audience again. It's another way of tapping into the audience because they'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Which I think is really smart. I think actually, like, since he has started, there is kind of like a story, but like, I don't know, maybe I've just like made it out for myself. Like, where the way he does the whole like series thing, it literally does remind me of like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
And like they start out, and when you see them like in campaigns, they always look like aliens. They look like they don't really like belong in their surroundings.
Yeah.
And then you see them in these like runway shows, and like it looks like it's from space, and they look very at home, like stomping down. And for this one, for me, it's almost like they're adapting to being like people, like with the fur, they're like adapting to being here.
To the,
but
like,
maybe I've just made that up for
no,
myself.
I like that. I do think there is an element to that where it's like, you know, he's so good at like retro futurism, you know, where everything looks a little bit like familiar. Like last season was a super retro, but there is this like chilliness to it where the girls always look like they're sort of not quite made for the now or what have you. And I do there's a certain warmth to this collection that I think, like a reality to it, which I think is interesting. I think it's also just an interesting time because there's been so many rumours, you know, that he's leaving or that they're not happy with his work. So I guess like there's such scrutiny on every collection. So doing something that is more grounded in sort of, you know, reality in some way. But I think he does have a design language there, definitely. Like I think of like, I think a lot of the, it's interesting actually the fur thing because I remember the first collection he did when he did that, I don't know if it was real fur or fake, it was real fur when he did that big black jacket. Do you remember that? It was like Mika Alganaras that wore it with like a black skinny trouser, and it looked so normal at one hand but so futuristic at the other hand. And I think that is kind of underpins a lot of what he does there, this kind of balance of real and hyper sort of strange.
Well, like even his exhibition a couple of years ago, it was like, it literally looked like you'd gone to a different planet.
The mirrored room.
Yeah, it was like, I thought it was amazing. I think it was one of the best like exhibitions I've ever been to, but it literally doesn't, like, and when you see their campaigns and they're like in the street or like just by a building, they look like they're like, take me back home.
Yeah, they look like they've been dropped there from like a spaceship. So we like it as a collection then? We're impressed, or we're on the fence?
Just like,
We liked it.
Yeah,
people that like will buy, like should buy it,
Yeah.
will buy it because there's something for them.
Yeah,
But
And
like
for
there's
lots
something
of
for
different people.
for lots of different people, I
Yeah.
think that's very true.
So it's very sellable. And I think the show itself, like the choreography, the finale now is really beautiful to watch. And
The show itself is like smashing it. There's like
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And,
It's the best
and I love it
space.
also when they really think about like it's amazing to also watch like online, which is
Yeah.
really amazing
Yeah.
because actually seeing that view is super wonderful, and that's how so many more people are going to consume it than the number of people in the room.
Yeah.
I imagine also it maybe slightly more fun to watch it like this than it is to
Yeah,
be there because
you
it's like,
appreciate it more.
view,
It's
yeah.
more beautiful.
you just it makes you think like, how do they? It's almost like maths how they realize how
know, it's
people
so
walk
smart,
around
yeah.
and cross
Yeah.
the
Like the way they
Not
shoot
one
them.
But I
person.
feel like the Louis Vuitton live streams have always been really good at
Yeah,
filming
really
it.
good.
Yeah.
They get those angles and seem to not get in the way of the audience at the same time.
It's like
just
the
insane.
pear one with Marc Jacobs with the two.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
that
yeah.
was
That
was
so
great.
well shot.
Really good.
I think
But I
it's
don't
quite
know
a
if
solid
Sorry,
show.
you go.
It's quite solid. Like you can't really hate it, but
Yeah.
it doesn't make you
Yeah,
like
it's
jump
not-
for joy.
yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
just quite solid.
That's kind of what I was going to say is that I don't know if I like the fact that it goes into everyone's wardrobe. I like when there's a solid story that
it's
they're
like
telling.
a safe place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very
It's
good.
like the dependable designer. You know
Yeah.
they're going to be good.
And even the casting, like the girls also look very safe in my opinion.
Yeah, they all look
They're
really
not
natural.
really like their own entity. They're all
Yeah.
a blank canvas, I guess, like the traditional model should be.
I guess there's that interesting thing though with him where in a way, if you think of the mood of the times in terms of fashion, a lot of designers who are having a real moment or very successful at the moment, there are designers who work in a highly emotional fashion. You know, they talk about, like, if you think of someone like Alessandro at Gucci, like this sense of like love and spirit, it's a lot about emotion. And there's also, like, this fashion week especially has been this like sort of complete outburst of like political energy. So you see that with, you know, your Raf Simons and people like that making these statements. Both of those things don't really chime with Nicolas Gassier. I don't think, you don't think of him as an emotional designer. Like, I don't think of his clothes being sort of, you know, full of love, and it's not like a Riccardo Tisci or an Alessandro like that. And also, again, like, you know, very intelligent man. I'm not saying he's like not politically engaged. I'm sure he has lots of opinions, but it's not, again, something that ever seems to inform his collections. You know, so I think also maybe this feels even more sort of, you know, pragmatic in terms of the clothing and the context of all these other sort of big statements that we've seen. Like, you know, there isn't anything here about, it's not about humanity, it's just about clothes.
I think about statements is because not necessarily the Louis Vuitton customer wants to wear a t-shirt against Trump or Brexit.
No, they pretty
so a big brand like Louis Vuitton needs to somehow play it safe in terms of selling.
And I just don't get the impression he ever would have wanted to do that kind of statement. Do you know what I mean? Like, which is, I just think it's interesting given the, like, this feels, you talked about how it doesn't feel like of this time or of this world, and I think even more so at the moment, just because it's so like, I don't know, it just feels very removed.
I think that's
it feels
good
like it's
though.
ignoring it almost, which I think can be problematic, like for big brands to not put out a statement and be like, 'cause fashion is so, like, it can almost like run the world, like it's, everyone is in tune to it, whether it's at a high street level or it's at a high fashion level. Like, you always, whenever you're choosing from your wardrobe that morning, no matter what you choose, it's always a statement of who you want to be that day or who you're going to be that week. And so I think fashion has such a platform where they could inform the masses on what they think is right or what they think is wrong, and I think people shouldn't be afraid to do that.
But I think if you don't want to do that, you shouldn't have to do that, because like a lot of brands did do that because it does make a good Instagram moment. Like if you get like Bella in a t-shirt saying like every woman matters or something, which obviously it is good, but like you shouldn't just do it because like for Instagram. So if you don't want to, you shouldn't be like forced to. So I'm glad that he doesn't do it,
that he doesn't,
because it's like a thing.
There's a lot of kind of like pointless like, you know, slogans and what have you, and it's really easy to be quite cynical about it, because there's certain people where you're really aware that it's something that, you know, is really important, and they've always operated in a way that is like, you know, humane and ethical, but there's the slight funny side to fashion, talking about like equality and feminism, when it just treats its women, from its garment workers through to its models, like so deeply badly.
But
So
I
it's
think designers that do it well are designers that carry on doing it, and they don't just do a one show to attract attention. So Raf Simons always had messages, same as Rick Owens, but especially like Louis Vuitton didn't.
You just don't think of it.
Like that. So if they did a really political show, yes, it would attract attention, but then if the next one goes back to being non-political, people will be like, where did it go? Where did it go?
And I don't think the same people would buy it. If they did a really political collection, I think they'd get a certain type of person buying it, and then they'd be like, oh, the sales are really good, that was really good, did really well for the brand. And then next season, if they went back to their roots, the same people wouldn't buy it, and the sales would go down, and then they'd be left questioning, oh, what happened?
I think it's cool to, like, I think it's cool to introduce that other customer though, and like, just get a new group of people, because there will still be some of those people who come back again because they're like, oh, they made a statement last season, they care, that's really exciting. And obviously that Louis Vuitton customer is always going to be there, or the bags are always going to sell. I think they can be quite comfortable in their expression.
Do you feel drawn to brands that have made, you know, that in some way feel aligned to your sort of political beliefs? Like, do you think about like the ethics of that? Like, would you not buy something because the person hadn't spoken out, because they didn't cast in a diverse way? Like, is that something that you guys think about? Is it, or do you see it kind of just close?
Casting, definitely.
Yeah,
I think about 100%, like with the Balenciaga show, where it was just a whitewash, like for his first show. I was just so embarrassing for how exciting Demna can be, and then it was just like, where am I in that?
And I think also, like, when you look at things like Balenciaga and Vetments, and they say that it's for a particular group of people, it kind of makes you think, if this is for a particular type of people, a particular race, then if you're not in that race, like, do I feel like obliged to be that kind of person? You're basically saying this is not you in a sense.
Yeah.
And I know they don't say it intentionally, but you kind of get that feeling if you're not going to choose these beautiful black models or Asian models to go on the runway, then are you trying to say that just normal, like every other ethnicity is just not really your brand?
Your thing,
Yeah, I still think that definitely is like a big problem, and a lot now, like this season especially, we did see like a lot of like black models and like Asian models coming through, but it kind of feels like a phase, because like lots of them were famous on Instagram before they were famous.
Yes, the known people that you tend to see. I think.
Like they built up their kind of fans, and then brands are like, oh, people really like them and we're going to use them, which just feels like a fad, and then those people will go and it will just be like mainly white models again.
That's what I think, I was talking about earlier, like having a face. I really, being a designer and like in school, both where I did my BA in Edinburgh at the Royal College, there's a lot of drive in you saying something through your work, and not everything needs to be political. You can talk about identity, you can talk about feelings, memories, whatever you want, but I really respect designers that respect their integrity and always carry on the work saying something and giving out a message without going through phases, so without just putting black models on the catwalk because it's fashionable and then taking them out the next runway. And I consider that in when I buy, and also in who I look out for. If you say something and express something, I think is a really valuable.
Yeah. I was asking it in part because I don't know if you guys have seen, there's been all the controversy in the last couple of days around some of the new Saint Laurent imagery, that it's like that it's like offensive to women, and I just would you guys look at something like that and then be like, right, okay, that is ridiculous? You know, do you think that within sort of fashion colleges there is a sense of sort of taking a stand against certain things and taking issues with?
I think there really is. It depends what kind of person you are, but there's a lot of, at least at the Royal College, there's a lot of drive for you to make up your mind and be a 360 kind of person. So not only think about skirts and jackets, but really think about who you are and what you want to say and be informed. Not everything that is around you and you'll be that interests you will then go into your work, but you should be aware of what's happening. So if someone made women look bad or men look bad, you should take that into consideration in terms of what is the brand saying. As you said, like fashion is such a strong platform to put across a message, and so many people watch it, so many people follow it. So many people don't care about the message. So many people go into a brand and buy a jacket because it's a jacket. They don't care about whether it's fur, it's ethical, it's polyester. But a lot of people do care, and if you are part of the people that care, you should make your personal stand and say your opinions towards it.
But I think what you were saying about how they don't have to convey that message every season, I think that's fair. But as long as you, as a designer, like you know that designer aligns with left wing or with right wing, or that they care about fair, I think that's what's important in fashion. Like at St. Martin's, like, what do you stand for? What do you agree with? And what? And you have to be political, like fashion and politics. People are like, oh, can you do fashion without politics? Like, no, you can't, because like I was saying, like you choose who you're going to be and who you're going to side with every time you choose an outfit from your wardrobe.
Big statement. Maybe that's quite a good statement to end on. Actually, it's really profound. I was like, Jesus Christ. Well, shall we give Nicolas Ghesquiere a round of applause? We have so much to talk about.